let's just, anyway, go back to the book and just focus on what he says at the end of this particular paragraph. So it's worth reading that sentence again. He says, quote, "We teeter on the edge of the bathroom scale in a way that minimises our weight, procrastinate getting a medical test that may return an unwelcome result, and try to believe that human nature is infinitely malleable." End quote. And that last bit there is just an unfortunate fallacy, especially from a psychologist, and a renowned psychologist at that. Someone who clearly does not understand universality. Now, perhaps universality is a new idea, cutting-edge epistemology and psychology perhaps, but it's true. We can understand anything that is understandable. We can understand any physical phenomena, because any physical phenomena is computable, which explanations are a kind of computation. We can construct explanations about physical phenomena out there in the universe. And that includes ourselves. In other words, human nature is infinitely malleable. This is not a bias or a prejudice or an error. It simply is the case that it's infinitely malleable. Now, whether or not we can, as a matter of personal psychology, go about solving our problems and getting over our anti-rational memes, as we say here, well, that's another matter. But in principle, we're infinitely malleable. And to deny that we're infinitely malleable is just an error. It's a misconception. So we should, well, believe, I don't like that word, okay? We should understand that it simply is the case that our best explanation of what human minds can do is to be infinitely malleable, is to take on any problem and solve it, to become the kind of person that you want to. You are infinitely malleable, and it's a pessimistic idea, I would say, for a psychologist to be telling the reader that they can't do anything they like with their mind, but they can. But Professor Pinker, like so many others, the Brett Weinsteins of the world and other famous psychologists, I think Jordan Peterson endorses a version of this idea. We inherit certain genes, and the genes are the things that cause us to behave in certain ways, and these things are just baked in to our psychology. And this is false. This is wrong. We can change our minds. It doesn't matter what the antecedents are of the ideas. The idea might be genetic. Okay, let's grant that. And I don't know if it's true, but let's grant that some ideas come from the DNA. Okay, they're implanted in there in the DNA, and they're fixed in the brain, and then they're part of our mind. But the mind is not the brain. The mind can change itself. The mind is infinitely malleable. Doesn't matter what the genes say. After all, as David Deutsch has pointed out, we might all have genes for survival. Genes for, let's say, eating stuff. But people routinely go on diets and refuse to eat. People sadly commit suicide as well. So if we have these genes for survival and eating, how is it that we explain that some people defy this genetic compulsion, this genetic requirement, this genetically determined behavior? Well, of course, I suppose the evolutionary psychologists come back and say, well, they've got a quirky gene, they've got a mutation that determines that they do the opposite thing, which of course is, what do we say? A bad explanation, because it can explain any sort of behavior. It can explain anything at all. Whereas we say it's the memes and the ideas that explain people's behavior. And that's not easily variable, because you need to talk about specific ideas. And by the way, no one's ever identified specific genes as causing specific ideas. So that's another matter. So let's keep going. This is a very slow process through this chapter. He then goes on to say, quote, "There is a more rational way to reconcile our ignorance with our desires. The tool of reason called signal detection theory, or statistical decision theory. It combines the big ideas of the two preceding chapters, estimating the probability that something is true of the world, Bayesian reasoning, and deciding what to do about it by weighing its expected costs and benefits, rational choice." End quote. Okay, so he's going to be relying upon the two pillars that are made entirely of misconceptions from the previous chapters. Bayesian reasoning, which is about a probabilistic assessment of your options, when usually you don't have that many options to assess. You either have one, and if you're lucky you have two, in which case you can do a crucial test to figure out which one is to be refuted. And rational choice, which, as we've said before, we cannot have these fixed set of rules that determine what our most rational choice should be, because rather often the best choice to make is the one not yet created. And we need to create that choice. We need to bring it into being. So it's not choosing among existing options, let alone weighing those options. It's creating new options, which are better than all the existing ones. And once you have that one that's better than all the existing ones, there's no role for weighting or Bayesian reasoning. You just do the best thing. You follow the good explanation, because all the others are bad explanations by the light of the existence of a solitary, single, good explanation.